Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for coming along to this meeting of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Cycling and Walking. My name's Oliver. I'm the Liberal Vice Chair of the group, and I'm going to start off by introducing why we're here and the speakers who very generously give them their time. Between 1934 and 1940, the United Kingdom built 280 miles of cycle tracks with Dutch guidance. Our meeting today will explore why they were built, how they faded from memory, and how they could be brought back to use. Very excited to introduce the speakers who are going to tell us all about this. Carlton Reid is a journalist and writer. Janet Hudson is Behaviour Change Manager at Leicester City Council. And Amy Priestley is an urban designer and planner with Urban Movement. Each speaker will have 12 minutes, and then we will have a short amount of time at the end for questions, and I'm afraid just to warn you now, I'm going to be pretty brutal about them actually being questions, not speeches, masquerading as questions. And if you're attending online, please put any questions you have in the question and answer box, not the chat box, and include your name and organisation. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Carlton Reid. Thank you very much.
Just one sec. We've got to make sure that people can see the slides, which they can't at the moment. So just give me one sec. Next. Here we go. Carlton, you're up.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for that introduction. You've praised most of it, actually. Yeah, I'm a historian as well as a writer and a journalist, and my particular speciality for this meeting, certainly, are these cycle tracks, which I can't say I discovered them, because at least one of them was reasonably well known 30 years ago. But I then used Google Street View and a bunch of other research methods over a number of years to discover an awful lot more. And so what myself and my colleagues who are on the modern side of this, are refurbishing these 1930 cycle tracks, is to show people that these bits of period infrastructure exist. There's at least 100 of them, perhaps more. There are more to be discovered, in fact, and they can be refurbished. Not all of them, because many of them were white elephants at the time, put in for various not very good reasons, but an awful lot of them are very, very, very good, surprisingly good, as you'll see when my colleagues take over and show you what refurbed period cycle tracks look like. First of all, I'll just go through, so Adam, if I have the next slide, and then the next one quite quickly as well. Is the fact I want to explain how impressively important cycling was in the 1930s. So that's clearly, that's Barrow and Furness, that's people cycling and walking and taking public transport from work. So this is clearly before the mass use of cars came in. So Adam, if you could have the next slide. I grayed out right the way through to the 1970s. See, that's where you see cycling taking that massive, massive dip. But if you look at this period we're talking about, which, as you said, Ollie, was roughly the 1930s, 1940s, cyclists absolutely dominated on the roads of Great Britain. So there were 12 million cyclists, and at the time, there were 2 million motorists. That clearly did change. But in the 1930s, what is now the Department of Transport, the equivalent back then, of course, MOT, the Ministry of Transport, they decided to put in infrastructure for cycling, and as you say, modelled on Dutch infrastructure. So the Dutch infrastructure that we all know and love today, that basically came in 2 years, 3 years before the infrastructure that we are talking about today. So the Dutch did have some pretty good experience here. So Adam, have the next slide. So this is a statistic. These are internal statistics from the Ministry of Transport, talking about how popular, how surprisingly popular, and how the Ministry of Transport, in fact, how shockingly popular cycling was. So that's a statistic of Bedford. So Bedford, 80% of the traffic of the time were people on bicycles. So the officials at the Ministry of Transport ostensibly wanted to improve safety for this mass form of transport, also, of course, to get cyclists off the road so that motorists could take over. So the cycle tracks of the time had, there was 2 reasons for them to exist. One was safety, but behind the scenes, an awful lot of the impetus was to clear the way. And basically MPs and peers wanted to go in on their motor cars. And so cyclists had to be, in effect, shoved off to the side. And many of the cycle tracks that were built at the time, and this, Adam, if you could go to the next slide, the next one, this is the first one in Ealing. This first one was shoddy. It wasn't very good. And the cycle campaigners of the time complained about this cycle track bitterly. The Ministry of Transport learnt from that and then built these 100 or so incredibly good cycle tracks. So that particular cycle track, bits of it still exist, but most of it has been subsumed by road widenings, etc. But Adam, the next one. So this is Leatherhead Dorking. This is the Burford roundabout. You can go to that and you can see that cycle track there today. And it looks not too dissimilar to that. And you will have groups of even roadies, even road cyclists will be cycling along that particular cycle track. So we are talking Dutch style infrastructure, which, you know, people say, well, we can never have Dutch infrastructure in the UK. It's like, yes, we can, because we've had it for more than 80 years. It's there. We've just forgotten about it, or perhaps we didn't know how old it was. So there are many cycle tracks in London and the rest of the UK, which have been there an awfully long time, and people just didn't know they were there, and it just went out of memory that these have existed for that long. So Adam, if we have the next slide. So this is just a fraction. So I've clipped off the far south, and I've clipped off Scotland, unfortunately, there, but just to get it onto one screen. So there are an awful lot of cycle tracks out there. Now, what we did for cherry picking purposes to see, right, well, they're the period cycle tracks. How can we make some of these? How can we bring them up to modern standards? So they're all 9, or many of them are 9 foot wide. Concrete surface, off to the side of the road. The space is there, and in many cases, it is still there. So how can we bring them up to modern standards? So not all of those that are on that particular map could be brought up to modern standards, but an awful lot of them could. So we have, as my colleagues will go through in a few moments, there are at least 12, perhaps 20, through love, care, attention, and what they call cash, could be brought up to modern standards. And my colleagues will show you what a period cycle track looks like when it has been modernised. This is my neck of the woods. Adam, you can go to the next slide. So this is the Great North Road it's actually in Durham. So these cycle tracks were put in at great expense and were exceedingly high quality. And again, that cycle track is still there. It's now called the Great North Cycleway. And Adam, we can go to the next slide. So that's my daughter on the pre-improved cycle track. So both sides of the road, both sides of the dual carriageway, this exists, and Durham County Council then improved it. So Adam, we go to the next one. So there they are. I was told what we're doing, and there they are, starting to rub up the concrete and put in fresh asphalt, and most importantly, signage. So Adam, if we go to the next one. So if you saw that today, I'm sure you've recognised, you've been, oh, well, that was put in 2 weeks ago. That looked brand new. That was put in place in 1935-36. But it has been refurbed, new signage, lots of things done with it. And in fact, Durham County Council only had enough money to actually improve one side of it. So there is an exactly similar period infrastructure on the other side of the road, which if the money was there, you could then actually have the cyclists across there. Before I hand over to Janet here, I'll just explain that the period infrastructure was not just for cyclists, it was also for pedestrians. So the cyclists, that is a 9-foot wide cycle track. So the cyclists would have bi-directional cycle tracks both sides of the road, and pedestrians would have 6-foot wide footpaths. So much of that infrastructure is still there in certain places. Adam, if we can go to my last slide, and that beautifully links into what Janet will be talking about. That is Melton Road. It's not the best photographs, but it shows you how the engineers of the time were apportioning space for motorists and for pedestrians and for cyclists. So on the far left-hand side there, you can see where the pedestrians are meant to go. The white brand new concrete there is where the cyclists go. And of course, there's a space for the motorists. So that's Melton Road. So that's basically the Roman road leading up north from Leicester. And what happened to that particular cycle track and the pavement on the one side, the footway, is it never got improved. So the road kept on getting fresh asphalt and was improved constantly. The space is roughly the same as it is today now, but the cycle track never got improved. So the space was always there, but there wasn't any actually improvement for the amenity for cyclists. So signage wasn't put in place. The surface was just left as concrete, and yet the road carriageway was constantly churned, constantly improved. So if I now hand over to my colleague Janet, who will now show you what that particular cycle track looks like today with a bit of love, care, attention and cash.
The first thing I just want to ask, could we skip down to slide 15, please? So yes, hello everybody, my name is Janet Hudson, and I'm a project manager at Leicester City Council. I also work on the behaviour change programmes as well. So thank you for the invitation to speak to this committee. So I was the project manager on the Melton Road Heritage Cycle Track, and firstly we just wanted to give an understanding of the scope of the works that we were undertaking. So as Carlton says, and has shown, the Melton Road is a dual carriageway into and out of Leicester City Centre, heading, it's actually the A607 that becomes the A46, which is the old Roman road. So the funding that we were granted was part of the Active Travel Fund 3, and we had 1.1 million to transform the heritage cycle track. We've got inbound and outbound, and we chose just to focus on the inbound side of the cycle track and to do it well. So in scope was a new Hudson crossing at the southern end, excuse me, which I'll come on to. There are 2 pedestrian crossings currently. We wanted to upgrade those to 2 crossings, 6 junction crossings, and then the major improvement work to the Troon Way. Next slide, please. So this is the Troon Way junction. As Carlton's already sort of illustrated, behind where I'm standing to take this photograph, behind me was the former site of the Thorn Lighting industrial site, where over 3,000 people worked, and the cycle track was chosen to support people accessing work sustainably, so cycling and walking. The picture on the left is what the cycle track did look like. So it doesn't look in too bad condition there, to be fair. But there were no cycle links to, as I say, that crossing there was a pedestrian crossing, not a toucan crossing, and the actual improvement works continue heading north and do link into the to get cyclists and walkers and pedestrians across the outer ring road. Next slide, please. What we also wanted to look at, and this probably the picture on the left probably gives a greater understanding of how the cycle track was there, but it had almost like fallen into alternative use. So where the car is in the photograph on the left hand side, the car in the distance, that is the 1930s cycle track. So again, you can see the width of the track as it was laid, but the priority to cyclists has been completely lost. So the picture on the right hand side shows how we've transformed this particular junction to give that priority access now to cyclists. We've narrowed the junction and also in a parallel project, the inside lane of the dual carriageway has been turned into a bus lane, and there is now reduced speed restriction of 30 miles an hour. So parallel projects to support more walking and cycling in the area. Next slide, please. This is the other major crossing, Glencoe Avenue, and you can see the state again, almost could just see in the photograph on the left where there is a small bollard. You can just kind of see the cycle track there, but again, there's no obvious cycle track. There's no obvious link. So we have prioritised the cycle track. We've introduced the new lining and signing. So we've got the give way markers for vehicles both entering Glencoe and exiting the junction. You can again just see on the main carriageway, the bus lane is there. And the red, we call this the Leicester red tarmac actually, but the majority of the cycle lanes and cycle tracks in Leicester are laid in this tarmac to give that consistency, to help to educate all road users that if they see that colour of tarmac, then it helps to be part of the educative process. Next slide, please. Alongside the cycle track on the green lanes on the right hand side, this is the Rushing Academy. There are around 2,000 pupils that attend this academy, and you can see the state of the shared use, the state of the paths on the left hand side in the photograph. We have actually swapped the cycling and the pedestrian tracks over. The school is fully on board, so part of the behaviour change work that we do, the school is fully on board with supporting the pupils to arrive by either walking or cycling. They've got bike sheds, and they will be continuing to develop and support within the school to now that the cycle track has been completed. And then the final slide, please. So this is heading in towards the city centre. We had, there are 113 trees that line the route. One of the stipulations from our city mayor across any of the projects actually in the city is not to take any trees down, and we're very proud to say that we had to remove one tree just for widening purposes, but you know, one tree in 113. And we have implemented, just beyond where this bus stop is, we've implemented the new toucan crossing, which enables cyclists and walkers that are coming outbound, so northbound, to access both the new cycle track, but also it is opposite the Rushing recreational ground, which provides access into the city centre via a quiet street network. This is the main mountain road into the city centre. Some of you may notice the Golden Mile, it's a heavily trafficked area. You would not want to be cycling into the city beyond this route. We stopped at the Trimway junction heading north. The actual cycle track itself does continue up to our up to the county boundary, and working with our county colleagues, should there be additional funding, and we could continue the route. The Rushmead residential area, which you can see on the left-hand side of all of the photographs, there are about 18,000 residents that live in that ward. So again, another side of the work that I do, I work with women, supporting women learn to ride sessions and confidence boosting rides. So we've now got this fantastic piece of infrastructure, could go further, yeah, it's been a great move to the city. Thank you.
Right. Lee, you want to introduce the next speaker?
Yeah. Next speaker is Amy Priestley, urban designer and planner at Urban Movement.
And my colleague John Dale will also be presenting with you as well.
Lovely.
John and I are from Urban Movement, so we were working with Carlton to really look at the findings from the study and assess what could be done to bring some of these side effects back to life, and where that's possible and where it might not be possible. Sorry. So we were trying to look at how some of the 1930s cycle tracks could be brought back into use through the work that Carlton had done. So the first example I'll talk through is from Leicester, from Hudson Road that Janet was just talking about. This is sort of really the first pass that we did of all the schemes. This is the sort of method that we used. Really just going down each side of the streets, looking at what infrastructure was already there, looking at where it's improved. A lot of the time, you're kind of looking, cycle tracks have been overgrown with vegetation over the years, or there'd be kind of junction and crossings where those cycle tracks sort of died and didn't continue. So our job was really to look through and pick through all the bits of infrastructure that were there, and look at how this could be brought back up to sort of modern standards. So this is an example of the output of that. So this is the Hudson Road in Leicester, and just an example of the applications that were things that we took on that could be done to improve it. If we go to the next slide. And that essentially was used to create a schedule of measures that could be used by sort of local authorities to look at how improvements could be made, could be used to go and like funding, the type of improvements. And then where possible, or what we thought was necessary, we then looked at doing actual design work to sort of illustrate some of the improvements that we made. So the next slide. So the next slide is an example from the Leicester scheme, just with some of those sort of junction improvements. So you can see the top right, looking at raising up the junctions, having treatment, treating the sort of carriageways there, and really emphasising the cycle routes. Looking at improving crossings, widening crossings, creating two-can crossings which allow pedestrians and cyclists to use them, and introducing kind of coloured surfacing, widening when needed. Things like that really. A lot of it was also to resurfacing, get you a really good wedge down the line of bringing them into use as well. The next slide. So this is just showing Leicester in the yellow dot there, and Stoke-on-Trent, which I'll go to next in the green dot. The next slide. So this was Hartfield Road, and Hilton Road in Stoke-on-Trent. This was one of the other schemes that we looked at, and again we adopted a process of going through, looking at both sides of the streets, and thinking about where improvements could be made, where infrastructure was sort of missing, or gaps we could fill, and things like that. And I think one place where a lot of schemes fell apart was a sort of junction and crossing. So if we go to the next slide. This sort of starts to illustrate that quite a bit. You can see you get sort of all over the place at the end of the markings, and the carry flow there where the sort of cycle track was kind of great, and then it just sort of stops at this sort of most dangerous sort of point or much uncomfortable point in your journey. So if we go to the next slide, and this was an example of some of the work we did for that particular junction in Stoke-on-Trent. So you're looking at everything on the left there is from LTM20 and is a Dutch style roundabout. And the image on the right is basically demonstrating how we could apply that to that particular roundabout in Stoke-on-Trent. And I'll hand over to John.
Thanks very much, Amy. Sorry, my name's John Dales, colleague Bailey. I'll just quickly take you through the schemes we haven't done yet, just so you know what they are. Amy showed that plan just before with a lot of red circles. We go from my hometown, actually I may not sound like it, in Carlton's up the drop from up near in the northeast all the way down to Surrey, and we'll get back to Box Hill and a few photographs that Carlton started with. One of the things I just pick up from Amy generally is she mentioned about that particular roundabout. So the big failure of these 1930 cycle tracks is they gave up at the junction, not as big roundabout as site as well.
So it hasn't changed.
Sorry, no, well there is that, and it was interesting. So very good links and not so good facts. Virtually nothing. So if you go to the next slide, what I'll do is I'll start with this combined scheme and blight. It's very difficult to see from here, but I think this is a good example of what we believe is the value of some of these schemes, which is there's a bit about 500 metres, a half a mile in Whitley Bay, and a bit to the north, a couple of miles north, there's another half a mile in Blythe. In their own right, as Carlton touched on, almost wide open. But what we did was have a good look at how could we join those together? Did that make sense? Do we just use this as an excuse and improve them in their own right? And can we join them together? And I think we can. So if you look at that plan, you can see a thing that says seek Luton in the middle, sort of two better parallel red lines. To the south of the southern of those, the North Tyneside Council is already building something that connects North Shildon up to Whitley Bay, which is a great start. We're saying, well, just keep going when you get to the Whitley Bay scheme. And what we did, thanks, no, we'll take that out, thank you very much. What we did was we didn't do this everywhere, we didn't have the funding to do that at the time. I should say we did all this work through support from the Department of Transport and with really good assistance from Sustrans as well. We're grateful to both those parties for all the help that they did. What we were able to do in this particular scheme was from end to end, not just where the 1930 schemes were, show how, using a scale maps, how you could get enough space to have a continuous route here. And because it's at the coast, because it connects Whitley Bay and Blythe and then Tynemouth and then North Shields, this could be great for leisure, it could also be great for commuting. So if you just go to the next slide, what you're looking on the top half of that picture is the northern bit of the northernmost bit of 1930 cycle track in England. As you're heading south from Blythe. And then below that, it's just a before and after. Carlton, amazingly, I don't know how he spends his days. I think I'm a massive nerd, but a massive nerd in different ways. Managed to find some old promotional videos of Whitley Bay, which is my hometown, of which there was just a little bit of footage of this particular scheme. So that's a shot on the bottom left there from the 1950s, Whitley Bay, and that's a shot that I took a couple of years ago of exactly the same place. That's that again. You've got the scheme is there. It's in pretty good nick. It just doesn't join up. And I thought just for purposes, you can give me the next slide, please, Adam. That's my shoulder and that of my wife as we were cycling up from Whitley Bay to Edinburgh this summer on this bit and on the other bit of the 1930 cycle track. Not just for the sake of it, and my wife did it willingly. I should actually add at this point. The next scheme, next furthest north, is actually a long way to the south, as I would see it. And this is in a place that I still don't know how to pronounce. I called it Yuxton. I think some people call it Exton.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Ollie. Exton it is there. And this is Exton Lane. And it's a track that if you look to the, you can see that picture underneath the word Lancashire. Brown much of there in the wood that used to be. So as Carlton has said, these cycle tracks tended to be built when roads were being built, and so they were built as part of that, not just let's get some cycle tracks in. And this was largely alongside a major employment area. But as you can possibly see there, and it's the case in every instance, is they just stopped. So what the excellent things didn't do is connect through to the hospital, which is there to the east, or connect down into Chorley itself, which is to the southeast. And so we think there's a real opportunity there to connect not only this part of the world with Chorley, but also with Buckshall Village. You can see a British Rail sign there, connections to the station, which are quite good. And if you go to the next photograph, I think it's a really good example of, I am standing on a bit of the 1930 cycle track that has been improved, at least widened, although it would be lovely if it had some protection from the main road alongside it. But you've got a footway there and a widened cycle track, and all of a sudden you're back into a historic condition. And there are some varieties here, as Carlton has shown, that tended normally be 6 foot footway alongside a 9 foot cycle track on both sides of the dual carriageway. This never was that. And all we ever seem to have had here is a 6 foot path. And so you can see how it's the relatively new and the old. So although it has been improved in recent times, A, it gives up at this junction, B, it kind of no more leads anywhere than it ever did. But it's a real opportunity, which is what our work has shown. It's not just how you would improve what you've got, but how you would extend it to somewhere where it would make it more valuable. The next scheme is in Formby and Sefton. And I wasn't, this is the one I haven't been able to go to, the 12 we selected as being of future value. It's hard to see, but Carlton sent his drones there. And the top shot is of that, and what you have there these days is a cycle track on one side of the road. And the reason I selected that particular screenshot from Carlton's work is simply because that's a major new housing area. And these are all people who, in the past, this was, you can see from the ancient, the contemporary drawing to the south, kind of in the middle of nowhere. They were building a bypass, hey, we'll add the cycle tracks to it, but they were not of that much value to it anymore. Increasingly these days, because of the buildings that are going alongside there to the north, which is the west of the sort of the left-hand side of the picture on the bottom, there's an RAF base there, which I think is coming forward for housing development as well. So in fact, this particular track didn't ever have that much utility. It's going to be more valuable coming forward. In fact, the local council recognise this. Second, you can go to the next slide, please. And this is a very quick photograph of what it looks like on the ground. And also the thoughts that the councillor had already had when we were speaking about this, about what it could do. Do you just widen that and improve it? Or do you widen it and also add a footway? And I suspect they will do both, because on some parts of this scheme, which is a very long one, there's no particular need because of the volumes of traffic, foot and cycle traffic you have to share, to split it in two, as well as have separate paths, but in other parts you could. Next slide, please. Down to Nottingham, this is the Arnold Road. If you go to the next slide, thank you very much, Adam. It's a great example of just how poor some of these side street junctions are. Very, very wide indeed. Which makes it really difficult for people to get across. You can see that is a long way across. It's more impressive in a certain respect, if that's the word. You take it from the side and look across, that will be at least 20-25 meters across. To the next slide, I'm not picking on the Nottingham scheme here. This just did seem like a particularly good example of just how it's still technically there, the footway and the cycleway, but it's just a mess, and it's just haven't been thought about or cared for. Interestingly, even on this scheme, as in many of them, if you look, you could go 100 yards one way and 50 yards the other way and find it. It's much better nick. But of course, if this is the weakest link in the chain that breaks the whole, and this kind of thing is relatively easy to solve with a bit of investment and thought. To Derby, where you didn't find this on many of them, and the reason this chap is trying to follow the 1930 cycleway across a slip road on a major A road is because that slip road and major A road didn't used to exist when this was built. If you go to the next slide, please, Adam, you can see a bit of spaghetti at the top here. In the 1970s, a new bypass was built on the east to west line, which meant that the cycle track was put up on a footbridge over the top of that, and you have that extremely dangerous and unsafe crossing, which is there. You are allowed to use it, but there's no good provision for walking, cycling across that. I did speak to National Highways at the time. They were actually really quite enthusiastic about it because it's actually their road. This it's the only one where that we looked at, the National Highway, and something could happen that I got in the chat. Again, you can see here that the south of that junction, there's a lot of employment uses off to the side of it. Actually one of the best schemes, I think, in terms of connecting people who live to the north and side of the scheme to a lot of employment and retail opportunities. And just another example here. Actually, this is in quite good nick, but again, it gives up at the junction. And no other country has cyclists this amount of cyclists. Really good at it. Next, please. Coventry, this is just to the east. It's the Kenilworth Road that runs north-south just to the east of the Warwick University campus, off to the left or west. In fact, and I took this photograph because you can see what it looks like to the north. It's all shrunk a little bit and even grown over. And again, this is no dual carriageway. You can see the footway on the left and the cycle track on the right of that central verge. And it's all one now because I'm standing in Warwickshire and the scheme stopped at the boundary. There's a lot that can be done here, and I'm glad to say that actually south of here, in the bit that is not the 1930s thing, most is happening, thanks Adam, because there's thank you, yeah, because, sorry, yeah, let's go to that one. So that green.
Next one.
Yeah, that one you're on, because just to the south of the city-county boundary, HS2 is coming through, and they are going to improve, in fact, not improve because it didn't exist there, but they are going to be connected further south and on the right of you can't make it. Warwickshire County Council are already looking at taking it down to the next village. So this is some existing works by HS2 and Warwickshire that will help to extend the value of the 1930 cycle track that's actually in Coventry, much further to the south. And again, this idea of joining up communities rather than just having pieces of cycle track stuck in the middle. Off to Oxford. Work is already happening here, but I thought I'd show you this particular road from Marston, this particular photograph of Marston Road. Oops. Sorry, from Marston Road, simply because, as you can see, although this is quite old, Oxford have previously gone to try and improve the side street junctions, a little bit like one of the ones that Janet showed you earlier. So you can see the giveaway markings of traffic leaving, that's set back now, and the cycle track across the mountain junction, but it's still wider than I like, has been marked in a way you can do that. It really is a short scheme, but it connects very well. If you go to the next slide, please. It's hard to see again, but you can see perhaps on the right-hand side of that map, that's the fairly between two red lines. That's a fairly short bit of the Marston Road cycleway. But up to the north, you can see where it says Marston Ferry Road cycleway. That was built in the 1970s. That sort of arc across an open space there. And that is a really good cycleway, even though much later vintage, it's comparatively old relative to now. And that connects with a couple of, in fact, 3 schools, I think. And so if you could just join those two together, again, it improves the one and join them together, you get a really good link to several schools, at least from a residential area. Last but one, we have Hayes, which is in Hillingdon, so just on the west end of London. This is a fascinating one in a variety of different ways because we think it was longer than we can find, but we don't really have much information, or we just judged on what's on the ground there. But this is again a really good route that connects a lot of residential and retail routes one to another as you head towards Uxbridge itself. Again, we've spoken with Hillingdon here, and there are some awkward junctions they need to deal with, but they would like to, they have plans to. If you go to the next slide, just a couple of photographs that again, if you can see these, it's just rather beautiful old photographs from the 50s and 60s in this case, showing the old signs that they've been there and they still exist. They're in pretty poor nick. In front of that shopping parade, in fact, they have been improved. Just a bit in front of the shopping parade, been improved a few years ago, and it's quite good. It's shared use, but it shows what can be done. But let's just, as Carlton said right at the beginning, the space is there. Let's continue to use it. You can go one down now, and that's just a view from a bus that I took along the Uxbridge Road to show what it's like and how. So the bit you can see perhaps on the left-hand side there, that's the original route here, and lost in a bit, and there's still a bit long carriageway and a tiny bit soft carriageway, and it's joined back again. It's okay, and again you get 4 or 5 miles of good linear cycle route all the way past houses and shops and so forth, if you could really stick that together well. And so we're back to the last and almost where we started here, down in Midland, Surrey. And Carlton mentioned a couple of things which I'm going to say myself. I don't know if you can really see it because it's so bizarre, but this was one that was built at a dual carriageway, and in one direction, amazingly, you can just see they decided they put one direction, the cycle track would be in the central reservation. It's absolutely mad. I have no idea how you ever could get into it or how you would get out of it. I have done it for science, obviously. But I have no idea whoever did that. That's the northern end of the cycle track. It is just an amazing piece of history, really. But on the right-hand side of that picture, which you can't really see it, where those signs on the lamp column is, if you go to the next slide, this is what Carlton was referring to earlier. The old path is still there, and it is used incredibly well by roadies and others. It could be a good deal wider, and probably should be for the stress it's under, but the space is there and it can be used. If you could just go to the next one, it's a really good example here as well of how that's quite a long section. You can't read this really, but it's long enough and good enough. And as I said a little while ago, if you think about it, you can get to the top and bottom. This can be extended in both ways. So instead of this being this rather random work, this could be a route that genuinely would connect where they're talking, and people could use it to get from there into Box Hill and the area of outstanding natural beauty that they could possibly commute. It's a really good example of how this core, where this kernel could become something that could be much better. My final photograph is back to Carlton's beautiful one at the left, and the photograph of my bike when I went down there one day to the wild. Exactly the same. Not nearly as glamorous or beautiful, and the head gets in the way of it. But it's still there, it could still be used, and it could still be part of something much better. Thank you.
Well, that's very interesting, and thank you very much to all our speakers for giving their time. We've got about 10 minutes for questions, and I'll be relying on you for any online ones we get. But to start with,
George Evans, that's the Lord's brilliant street presentations. I wanted to think the book. Yeah, thank you very much for the comprehensive. First question: to what extent is this work related to what Sustrans are doing, building a national cycle network and working together? And second, just on priorities. Nowadays, people who bicycle are either bicycling to work or school or to the station for leisure. And all the leisure ones, they want to go down quiet country lanes, and the commuting ones aren't really going to go along a huge arterial road. And so, to what extent is, given there's not a lot of cash around, should we be focusing on recreating the roads that made sense, the routes that made sense in the 1930s when most people cycled, not many people had cars, or really focusing on some of the useful work you were doing in Melton and Exeter and elsewhere, which is using the bits within communities to further those links, given that we haven't got the cash to recreate all the old routes that were thought of in the 1930s.
I'll take that. Sustrans did adopt some of those routes and didn't actually know that those routes dated to the 1930s. They just came along in the 80s and 90s and went, well, that looks like a good route, so we'll use that, and had no idea it existed for that long. To your second part, that's what we did. We went through 120 schemes and thought, well, that was a white elephant then, it's a white elephant now. Nobody will ever want to cycle along that route, just as they didn't want to in the 1930s, and that's why it was used, and that's why it fell into disuse. So we cherry picked. So we got those 12, and those are the 12 that we think were the most applicable, and then one of them has actually had the cash and has been shown if you do refurb it, this is what it can look like. So Leicester is a perfect example of that is a route that was good back then, still good today, but has fallen out of use because it wasn't signed very well, and a lot of it was just degraded. And if you make it better, then people will use it, and that is very much a route, but as we've seen, between shops, between former munitions factories in the war. So it was a very important route during the war for getting workers to the factories, and it's still in use today for reasonably the same reason. People want to get places. So those 12 routes were chosen for that exact reason.
So I'll just quickly add that the report that we wrote shows where it's relevant, where the NCN lies relative to these, and we work with Sustrans in doing it, so they can see where there's an opportunity for them, and in some cases to actually change the routing of some of their NCN routes in order that they can maximise this opportunity.
Yes, yeah.
I'd also add as well that in a parallel process, we do development work to help people understand where the new routes are. So not just this one, but across the city as well. So as fast as we're building it, people need to know that they're there. We do led rides. So we teach people how to ride, and then we give them orientation rides to show them that this is now possible, and if you live in this area, this is how you can get into the city. So I think it's a package. It's not, we need to support people to apply the skill and use the infrastructure.
Or can it just pass additional to that? Since we
Yes,
are
briefly.
since we are on the balance between leisure cycling and using cycling as a measure of transport, and where is the balance there? Because I think it is absolutely right that there's different types of cyclists, those who just do it for leisure on the weekend, and those who are actually commuting into work or whatever. And is there actually any balance, any priorities? Do you look at it in that separation at all, or is it just wherever you can put a cycle path and it doesn't cost too much money, let's do it?
The cycle tracks that we cherry picked, I would say 95% of them are urban and are for transport rather than for leisure. I might be wrong there. There's a few, for instance, the Whitley Bay.
The first and last,
Cran
in fact,
is different.
essentially, really.
But most of them are for transport,
Okay.
and can be used today for transport. And so the drone shot of that white elephant route is now no longer a white elephant route because there's been infill, and you can now definitely use that, even though probably in the 1930s it wouldn't have been used. Now it can be used. That one I showed you of the Great North Road in Durham, it's no longer the Great North Road, it's a different number, but that also has had infill. So it was a white elephant in the 1930s. Now that is perfectly possible to link shops and other amenities.
Sorry, you wanted to.
I think the addition of e-cycles as well turns the leisure cyclists into the commuting cyclists. That as a bicycle, that is transformational and will help people to commute more.
What is the longest of these routes in terms of distance? I mean, the one thing that I felt was missing actually from the presentation was not giving more information about how long these were, because it makes a huge amount of difference in terms of their future potential. So most of them were between 2 and 5 miles in length. So as John mentioned, they were put in when they were building dual carriageways. The South End, Romford to South End, was 22 miles. So some of them were of good distance, and many of them, as John have shown, can be linked in. So they were put in staccato, but you could link them today. And I should say, the Ministry of Transport wanted to link them in. This wasn't just, right, we're putting 100 schemes in, we're going to end there. Hitler had quite a lot to do with this, in that we no longer built anything for cyclists after the Second World War. Loads of plans to carry on building to be a Dutch-style network. And then the Second World War came along, and Homes for Heroes was the impetus for the post-war government. And motorists weren't given anything for 20 years either. So cyclists and motorists were neglected in the post-world war situation.
Sorry, I'm going to let some people who are online come in, and if we'll come back to you if we have time.
Okay, so we've got a question from Ruth Cadbury, who's former chair of this group. She's got 2 questions. Firstly, for those of these roads that are owned by national highways, do they have a decent policy and practice on improving this stuff? And secondly, the Great West Road A4 in my constituency is one of these roads and has retained the footpath, a line of cherry trees, the cycle path, then 3 traffic lanes, except at the main junctions, e.g. Sion Lane, where the need to increase vehicle capacity over the decades means the cycle path has disappeared at the junctions, which forces cyclists into the carriageway or onto the narrowed footways. This is a TfL road. Any similar experiences and solutions?
So just quickly on that, I obviously live very near where Ruth lives. And we didn't look at it, just to say, I think that is a really good example of something that could be done. We chose not to have more than one scheme in London, just because otherwise we could have had it future. And we do think there's a really good opportunity to connect that Oxley road route together. There are some real problems with our junctions that always will. I know for what the Simonland junction is. Basket case that we use, it's a technical phrase we use in traffic engineering. But it can be improved. Sorry, the first part of the question.
First one was for those of these roads that are owned by national highways.
Yes. So
do they have a decent policy?
Theoretically, yes. In practice, no. And I sort of hinted with the Derby scheme, which is the only one of the 12 which have a national highways connection, is it just so far down their list of actual priorities. It could be done with just that junction. If you remember, I showed there's a really scary junction on the slip road. It really wouldn't take too much, but it would take, I think they're good where they can provide cycle infrastructure that doesn't really interfere with the free flow of traffic. It's a lot more challenging to them to do that. And yes, I've also hinted, I thought that particular scheme was one because that big spaghetti interchange that dropped over something that really severs communities on both sides, and so the potential there is just that junction. Everything else is pretty good.
And that photograph right at the beginning of the presentation is of that. That's Osterley. That's the Osterley station part.
Okay, I've got a few other questions. So Peter Corkill, Senior Transport Planner, Warwickshire County Council. Where you have reinstated restored heritage tracks, have you had to do any legal orders to permit cycling, or is it presumed because that is what they were originally created for?
That would be not me.
I don't know if you have to do it.
Yeah, I can talk to what we did in Leicester. The simple answer is no. We didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to do a consultation because we weren't changing the use. Where we were implementing the new crossing, we had to do public notices, but no complications.
The only example of that it is, it's not actually a legal one technically, but some of these, there's a really good example of one in Manchester, in Russia, I think it was, where over the years the cycle traffic has become used for parking, and so that becomes where it doesn't matter what historically it used to say or what it's technically there for. The custom and practice of it having been used for parking would make it really challenging to, because that has to become established practice. But it's not technically in order that you can that for.
Okay, Tom Bogdanovich, London Cycling Campaign. Is there any indication of what proportion of remaining cycle tracks are now used as car parking zones? Would CPZ's controlled parking zones impact such usage? And he said this question was about urban tracks such as Redbridge.
I think see the above answer from John. Basically, yes, an awful lot have been, and it would be tough to take that away.
Okay.
None that we looked at, but we found it as well.
But wouldn't a simple solution be to put these little bollocks on it?
You could stop parking. It's the effect, if you like, the public engagement side of getting rid of the parking would be the challenge. It's not that you couldn't exclude parking from that, but when over a period of 20, 30 and more years they've effectively been considered to be residential car parking, it's quite a challenge to say, and what have their space beside you. It's a small.
Okay, Katie from London Cycling Campaign again. Very interested in the Hillingdon Uxbridge Cycleway. That's the one we talked about with Ruth. How can we work with TfL and Hillingdon Council to look seriously at this? It would be great for TfL to show some good routes in outer London that would add nicely to their tally of kilometres. London Cycling Campaign would love to talk to anyone about this, so please get in touch if it's of interest.
Give me a call, Katie. The answer to that.
Okay.
I did speak to them, and I think that they were visible. One of the reasons we chose Hillingdon was exactly for those reasons, which is they had this thing haven't got a huge amount of cycling, but it was a kind of, come on, it's almost all done. And it had some other plans. I don't know where it is at the moment, but they were certainly the officers who spoke to were from it and thought that politicians would be too.
Okay, Ali Atai has asked, I still see many inappropriate legacy cyclist dismount signs and physical barriers such as lampposts and signs on cycle routes. How can we change the mindset for the use of these signs obstructions more in favour of cyclists and other users, of wheelchair users and people using buggies?
What we've been doing, I think active travelling, that's the real responsibility of that. There are legacy signs there, and they just have to. I think there was a good example that I drew attention to again on the Derby scheme, and there was no need to have it there. It would make good sense as the junction is currently laid out. There's sides to give way, but it was never needed that it would say dismount. That would be an engineer since 1930s, probably 10, 20 years ago, coming along and thinking, I'll put those signs up to try and keep my to try and protect my backside.
Given me an idea for private members bill actually to ban any cycling outside, particularly on cycle routes. I think we're going to have to wrap up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving your time and talking through the fascinating history of this and taking it to the present day. Our next meeting is in person only and is on Monday the 27th, so that's 2 weeks today, also starting at 4:30, where we'll be hearing from Simon Lightwood, MP and Minister for Active Travel. And as well as thanking our speakers, I'd like to thank Adam for all the work he does for the APPG, because this is the most effective APPG I've seen during my short time here, because it actually does stuff.